Friends, I struggled with trying to title this episode because there are so many subjects that we discuss I hold dear and frankly wanted to capture your attention with. This week, I'm talking with Kristina Batiste, who not only has a minimalist style of my dreams that simultaneously holds so much power in its simplicity, but who's also been integral to starting the Tacoma Pottery Salon. And if you've listened to even just one other episode recently here on the podcast, you know I get excited talking about the importance of building community. So before we dig into this lovely chat, I wanted to just share really quickly 2 time-sensitive tidbits specifically for the Tacoma Pottery Salon. Number 1, it just so happens that the next Pottery Salon is next week, September 23rd. If you happen to be listening to this podcast on the day that it airs, which is September 15th. And if you also happen to be in the Tacoma, Seattle, Pacific Northwest area. But it also just so happens that the meeting after that, on October 21st, is when Francesco and I are visiting friends in the Seattle area. Now, our plans aren't set exactly just yet, so I'm not making any promises because this is meant to be a long overdue trip to visit my bestie and not a work trip. But we just might need a little pottery fix somewhere in the middle. So we'll see. Maybe. If you are in the Seattle area or the Pacific Northwest and enjoy a good road trip through your beautiful scenery, you can learn more at tacomapotterysalon.org, which I will, of course, put a link in the show notes. Before we get into the story of the Tacoma Pottery Salon and so much more about Kristina's journey with clay, a brief word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Cammie, the purchasing manager at Amico, providing you with everything you need for clay. This episode is brought to you by Amico Brent. Find your favorite Amico glaze or Brent equipment at your local distributor. Happy glazing.
Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 13 years, Rebecca Ikes-Kara. Welcome to the podcast, Kristina.
Thank you.
I forgot to mention before we hit record that I was going to make you introduce yourself straight from the beginning, so this is a little unfair.
Okay. Well, I will be happy to do that. I am Kristina of Juniper Clay. I identify as a potter. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm in Tacoma, Washington, making pots in my basement studio.
Awesome. So I feel like I have followed your work for quite a while. I think I'm going to slightly slip out of my typical lane that I stay in for podcasting because I don't usually talk about aesthetic or making practice. I talk about business, right? But I'm obsessed with your style. I think it is beautiful, and we're just going to fangirl on the aesthetic for a little while. I'll just get that out of the way straight from the beginning.
Well, thank you. I am delighted.
Yay. How long have you been making pots?
I've been making pots for about 7 or 8 years now. Ever since I moved to Tacoma is when I got started. My style and what I like to make is I really like minimalism. I really like the least that you can do in that piece. What can you take away and what else can you take away and still have it be what you want it to be is what I'm trying to do. And so that's the editor in me that really wants to take more and take more and take more away. And I feel really lucky that the things that I like to make people like. I could very easily love making something that nobody wanted, and I just loved making it. So I would probably just keep making those things. But I feel really lucky that people like the kinds of things that I like to make.
Where did you move from?
Okay, so I moved from 2016. I moved from Los Angeles. I wanted to try pottery. I did take in LA. I took a one-night class. It wasn't a class, though. It was come and play around. And if you, as we all know, you cannot do anything on a wheel until you can center. And of course you can't center when you're, you can't do that. And so it was just this exercise in frustration. I did not like taking that one-time class. That was horrible. But I still wanted to do this. So I knew we were moving to Tacoma, and I was scouring the Craigslist looking for equipment, and probably like a lot of us, I wanted to buy a wheel. And the secret is buy a kiln. Don't buy a wheel. You can make a million things without a wheel. You can't make anything without a kiln. So I did, though. I got this wheel. I got this Brent wheel on Craigslist. It was a fantastic deal. And it was practically brand new, and it worked great. And I couldn't center. And so I'm working with this thing. I'm just struggling for a really long time on my own for a couple of months, trying to practice, trying to get it, and I could not get it. And then I ended up taking a class at my local community college, Tacoma Community College, which has had a fantastic community program. They have this beautiful studio that is like a university level, fancy, great, amazing studio, some really brilliant and accomplished 2 professors they had at the time. And you could take a class. You didn't have to be a student, and you could take this class, and that allowed you to take a class where it's 3 days a week for a couple of hours, and you can use the studio whenever you want, anytime. You can make as much work as you want. There was recycled class clay. You can use as much clay as you want. It was such a way to learn.
This is a unicorn.
It was a magical thing because, one of the professors, Rick Mahaffey, would say his favorite thing to say was just try it and see. I don't know, try it and see. Try it and see. And you just making more and more work was your goal, is to make as much as you can, because that's how you're learning how to do this. And so I took it the first semester, and the first semester was just focused on hand building, on making stuff by hand, which was great for me because I got to be there all the time. On Saturdays I was there. I was there for hours during the week, and it was wonderful. And I didn't have the struggle. I didn't have that painful learning curve of not being able to center. And I worked on stuff for a while, and I tried to do it a little bit more. And then I finally took another kind of tutoring session at this other local clay center here in Tacoma called Spun. And the woman was working with me. This excellent potter was working with me. And she suggested that I go clockwise rather than counterclockwise. And that made all the difference in the world. I was going from, like 1 or 2 successes out of 10 to 8 or 9 every time by spinning clockwise. So I throw clockwise. I'm right-handed, but
you're not left-handed.
I'm not left-handed.
I was just going to say, okay.
No, I'm not left-handed, but I throw clockwise. And it was a huge turning point for me. And then I could, all of a sudden, once you can center, you can start to really learn and practice and do more stuff. That's how I got into it and started just making work. At TCC, that's a Cone 10 reduction studio. Now I work in Cone 6 electric, and I love it. And yeah, so that's how I got into it, was struggling, but still loving the material, still loving making clay, still loving the process of what we were doing.
I feel like this has always been the litmus test for me that, if you still want to keep doing it, even for anything in life, right? For deciding what I wanted to study in school, for deciding, I don't know, a career or whatever. Like, if you're willing to stay up late to research some really benign information about it, or if you're willing to just keep going through that struggle, is kind of like, okay, this is a sign, keep going here. Because
try.
I remember that really early on when I was still a music student. All of my musician colleagues were like in the practice rooms for hours and hours and hours, skipping their other classes. And I was like getting out of the practice room as fast as I could to go to the art school and like staying up late on design projects, and was kind of like,
maybe I'm in the wrong program here. Yeah, I do think that your attention is a really good, where you put your attention is a really good indicator of what's important to you, of what, like if you spend time and attention on something, that is important to you. So yeah.
Yep. Well, and before I get ahead of ourselves here, you did mention we for moving. So was there like an impetus or a reason for moving, or kind of give everybody a little bit of the foundation?
I'm married to actually, today is our anniversary. Today is it's like our ninth anniversary. We've been together a lot longer than we've been married. So I think it's our 9th anniversary. We got married on Labor Day. So our anniversary is actually the Friday before Labor Day. So it's much easier to remember than a specific date. And we were living in Los Angeles and moved to Tacoma. My family lives in Kirkland, Washington, and his family lives in Eugene. So we wanted to live there. He's an architect. We bought this old house that he's been working on continuously since we moved to Tacoma and is still working on continuously. So yeah, that's why we picked up sticks and moved to Tacoma. And we love it. Tacoma's great.
That's, well, like I was going to say it's more manageable than LA, but I feel like Washington is kind of, my best friend from college just moved to Seattle. So I'm kind of like, is it more manageable than LA? Like, I don't know.
Well, Tacoma and Seattle, very different. Tacoma has opportunities that you would not believe that happen for artists. There's an arts community here, and it's just much more accessible and it's much more approachable than in Seattle. Like, I had that. There's two big factors, I think, that factored into me being a potter. And one of them was TCC. The other is we have Clay Arts Center, which is our clay supplier that's here in Tacoma. And those two things, having a clay store that you can walk into, that they're so friendly and they're so helpful. And they don't care that you're spending, you're buying one little bag of clay and you're asking them 150 questions about it. They are just as happy to help you with that as they are to the person who's ordering, 3 tons for delivery. So that's where you are and what you have access to, I think can be a very big factor in your success or your experience as an artist. And for me personally, I think in Tacoma, there's a lot of opportunities and you have access because it's much smaller that you can meet people and take advantage of little sales or craft fairs or markets or do things that are a lot harder to get into in a big city like Los Angeles or Seattle. So yeah, small cities for the win.
I feel like it's kind of similar. It reminds me a little bit to Milwaukee, where you're near a big city. And so there are kind of resources that drip out. And anybody in Milwaukee or the Wisconsin area is going to be upset with me. But I'm like, okay, Milwaukee's a city, but it's not like a city the way that Chicago, LA, New York, Seattle.
It's small and I like it. It allows you to build community. We've started, me and one of the other professor from TCC, Rita Zaki, we've started this Tacoma Pottery Salon where we meet every month, every 6 weeks, and a potter will come and bring their work and talk about their work. And we've had some amazing potters. We've Ken Turner has come through and talk to us, and Sam Scott and Patty Warashina, and they come and talk to this group of really engaged potters and get this thing going. And we have people that come from Seattle and Olympia, and they say, we don't have anything like that in Seattle. That there's something like this that is free and accessible and that everyone is welcome at doesn't exist. So there are opportunities you can get with small.
Well, so you brought up the salon, and I mentioned before we hit record, we do have some questions from our community members because we're doing that now inside of the community. Everybody knows who I'm recording with before we record, so we get a little opportunity. And that was the first question we got was from Jessica Sanchez, wondering how the salon got started in the first place.
Well, I will be happy to tell you. I will also direct you to, we wrote an article about it for Studio Potter in June, so you can go and read that article. We have a shiny new website, TacomaPotterySalon.org, which tells a little bit of the story of that. But basically, Reed and I were having coffee, and he was talking about how wanting to do accomplish a couple of things. There's basically this group of potters who have been working in the community or working as potters for decades. And they have a lot of, like he puts it, we have 50 years of mistakes to share. And we need an audience to share that with or talk to about this stuff. And some of them are, retirement age or thinking about that. And some have been younger. We've had a lot of different guests. But he basically wanted to figure out a way to connect people who are working, who started at a different time than they started and with a different set of skills and experiences, and bring people together so that we could exchange ideas. Another real motivation for him was that he really wanted to make sure that, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, potters got to know each other through going to art fair. They'd see their careers evolve over years and decades. Because even though you're not seeing someone every week, you're seeing them twice a year at this fair that you would sell at, and getting to know people and talking through problems and just being more a part of that. And that has kind of disappeared with online sales and the way that galleries have changed the way they work, and just a lot of the changes that have happened in the business side of pottery have affected the community side of pottery. So he was thinking about that. I was thinking about just wanting to have that community program at TCC. That's where I met potters. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone in Tacoma. I didn't know any potters, but you were able to meet people there and see work and connect with people and have a community. And that's what I wanted to do. And so we kind of hit on this idea of doing these salons, and it started off as a 6-episode thing, and it's just kind of grown from there. And we've had these potters come and bring their work and bring slideshows of their work and talk about their career evolutions and talk about what they love to do. And what's nice is that it's not a lecture. It is much more of a conversation. I think it works great when it's smaller. And so that's my own bias. I want it to be small. And of course, we also want it to be big or have more people coming to it. But they've been phenomenal. They've been really, really phenomenal. And we got a grant through Tacoma. This is another thing. In a city like Tacoma, there's these grant programs, and something weird like a pottery salon can get one. We don't have to be super famous people doing massive things to get a little grant. So we got a grant.
Or even knowing like how to write a grant and having a 401c3 status or, or 501 or whatever it is.
We're not. We're just individual artists. Yeah, we're just doing this as individual artists. And part of me, I can see it. All the money has been just me spending it. We buy food, we buy snacks, we buy wine. The salons have all been at our house here in Tacoma. And so it's very casual and they're really fun. The next one coming up is going to be the first one that's not going to be at my house. It's going to be at the Washington State History Museum. And so we're branching out and seeing if we can maybe do it in other places. But getting something like that. We also are going to get an award from the city of Tacoma for building community in the arts, which again, you're not going to get that in New York. We're not going to get an award for something like that, but in Tacoma we can. So yeah, the salon has been phenomenal. And I think that there should be, if you're listening to this podcast, I guarantee you that wherever you are in the world, there are potters in your community who have been making pots for 20, 30, 40 years. They have stories to tell. They may or may not have had a chance to give a career retrospective. And it's only good. And it's not terribly hard to get it up and running. So I would love to see the Milwaukee Pottery Salon and the Austin Pottery Salon and the Miami Pottery Salon. I think you could have these anywhere in the country and connect some of the people who've been in the field for a long time with people who are just getting started in the field or who want to connect with people.
I'm obsessed with this idea, clearly. I mean, anybody who's listened to me open my mouth knows I'm going to talk about community and the importance of it. But I think what's especially interesting about what you guys are doing is, number one, I think there's a gap in American culture, at least, of generational teaching, right? Mm-hmm. Of kind of letting that generation prior to us just phase out instead of having this intergenerational conversation, and how much knowledge can go both directions. And in localizing it and having it, because there's pros and cons. There's pros to being online and virtual because you can bring people together all over the world. You can kind of even the playing field in terms of access and resources and all that. But then the pro of localizing it is you can reach out to those people who maybe aren't comfortable technologically, who are, I think of the most accomplished potters I know, and that's not a big list, so I'm sure there are plenty more of them, are not the most Instagram famous potters either.
Yeah.
There's this contradiction. Well, and even if they are,
you're going to love the article. Go read. So Reed wrote the first half, I wrote the second half, and Reed's whole introduction is talking about exactly what you were just talking about. This concept, he came across a word called shokunin, which is a Japanese word that kind of means craftsman, but it has this nuance in it that there is a responsibility to teach something or to communicate beyond yourself. And I think you're going to love it. You're going to love the article. I'll send you a link.
Yeah, I'm going to link to it in the notes. I've written down a note literally on paper so that I remember to link to it in the notes of this episode, so everybody can just go click and read it, and we'll put all the things in all the places. Oh, I love that. And also, when you started listing off different cities but still using the word salon, it makes me think about the groups that I got involved in when I very first was starting my business that were all over the country but connected by, this was through like a company that sponsored them and got people little budgets to buy the very important snacks and drinks that should come along with any of these meetings.
Yep.
That is well-used grant money, I'm just saying.
Yeah, you have to have some money for food.
Yeah. But the idea of having the salon as like a web of places all over the country was just, as you were saying, like the Milwaukee salon, the Miami salon, I was just getting like, oh, how cool would that be to have an informal, formal, like, oh, hey, we're gonna be, I don't know, you're traveling and you can look up like, oh, the Tacoma salon is meeting while I'm there. Let me go. I mean, I've done this with other organizations. Like, it's not impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be really, that would be really fun to do. And it's not the barriers to entry. I guess I will add a page to my website of getting started with the Pottery Salon, like what I think are some of the important things about that. But it's not that. It's work and it takes your time and attention, but it's definitely worth it.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, I want to keep hearing your story. Otherwise, I'm just going to dive down.
Well, do you want to ask more about my pottery or questions, or what's the next question?
All the things. I definitely don't have a prepared list.
Okay.
So I'm going to keep going backwards in history. And then that always feels like it kind of roots and connects us to where we are today. When I look at your style now, it looks so well thought through. And when you say you've only been doing pottery for 8 years, I'm like, all right, what's the background? What were you doing before? Because I think I'm coming up on 8 years and I absolutely do not have like an aesthetic nailed down for myself personally. Like I'm gobsmacked here.
That's a good question. So I think that I also think there's an age factor to this. One of the things that I think has been a real advantage to me is that I didn't start this work. I didn't start this till I was 40. So being older, I have seen a lot more of the world. I have seen things and I have had experience and collected experience, and I have a point of view that was not accessible to me when I was 25. I did not have that. I didn't have anything to say. I probably hadn't seen enough yet in order to do that. And so I think that just age alone has been an important factor in me in developing what I like to make. And I think I've always been kind of an editor or someone who appreciates a lot of simplicity about things in writing or in anything. That's been a through line of what I like to do. And I've had different jobs. I have been a writer and editor, worked in editorial stuff. I've done graphic design stuff. I did that for a while. I went to school. I'm a librarian. I went to library science school. And I worked as a content strategist and information architect and, working on developing websites and stuff. So through all of those, I think organization, clarity of thought and organization of thought and presentation so that someone can understand what you're saying without a lot of work on their part has always been something that's important to me. And that translates into what I'm doing with clays, that's why that minimalist approach is so appealing to me. I don't want a lot of distraction. I also think I find the world very fast and there's so much going on and there's so many demands on your attention and there's so much just noise that I want to make work that's a lot quieter than that. And I think that feeds into what I'm trying to do, is that I don't want to make stuff that adds to that stuff. And what's odd is I really appreciate a lot of, some potters that I love do incredibly decorative or ornate pieces. And I love that. I think that the variety of pottery is wonderful. But what I want to make is not like that. The stuff I want to make is a lot simpler.
It's always so interesting. I'm learning to really listen to this as well in terms of finding the aesthetic. Like when I'm drawn to movements or lines or things in completely other mediums, like it's finally in the last year, I think, clicking of like, oh, that's the same thing as... because what I'm drawn to now in my making is not going to look anything like yours, but like here I am fangirling over your aesthetic. And isn't that so fascinating? Like how these different things, I don't know. This isn't a question. It was just
you take a lot of inspiration from a lot of different things and like buildings and the space that you're occupying and what you see in the world all becomes part of what you're trying to put into your work or ideas. I think I'm also really trying to think about the work as I love making functional work. I also am excited about making some functional sculptures or sculptural work or things that are more decorative that may have something else going on with them. But I want both the functional and the sculptural work to carry something with them a little bit more than just being that function. And I think that that also can be a big driver of how can you do that without being as literal as maybe as appealing or attractive, and how can you ask that clay to hold on to a really big idea for you is what I want to do.
And that's what I think actually for me makes your work stand out, because you're taking on some very big subjects in a lot of, and this is going to be a two-pronged question / observation,
Okay.
is that on the business side, I see you announcing these sets, right? And it is functional work, but the way you're talking about it and the way you're presenting it to the world is very much, to me, in a fine art kind of limited run, specific numbers, controlled. Oh, there was a phrase that Virgil used when he and I were talking that was, kind of just being intentional about how much you're producing, right? You're not producing at your max capacity because this is how much you can make, and here's my shop update, and this is as many mugs as I could make in a month, and off we go. But it is, at least to me, from the outside looking in, you're threading this needle between functional work and yet having a conversation in a fine art, capital A way that I don't see that many other people succeeding on that front with, and that's I imagine at least that's a very hard thing to balance and communicate to people and ultimately succeed with when it comes to selling the pieces.
I mean, I would wonder about my success rate, but yes, I do think that is what I'm trying to do. And I think that I'm also I love making cups. I love making mugs. I will always love making mugs and cups, but I also want to make, and I like the individual conversation that you have with someone when you get to make a cup and a mug. That's somebody that is going to be holding that and using that until it breaks or they're no longer with us. They're going to be using that thing. And I love that one-on-one interaction, but I'm also interested in that. I love that, what you said, that art with a capital A, big things, or things that might be more suited to a larger audience, rather than the one-to-one, a one-to-many audience. And trying to balance that is really interesting. Both create things on both sides of that line, and things that are on that line is something that's really interesting to me. So yeah, I mean, I do think that. The other thing that motivates that for me is I'm not fast. I am not a fast potter. I know you've talked to, who's my favorite, Rich Brown. He can make work like there's no tomorrow. I mean, it is amazing watching him work. And I'm never going to be there. I'm never going to be able to work that fast. And I kind of that's another thing I think comes with ages. I just accept that about myself. That's not what I'm going to be able to do. I cannot compete on that level. And so I'm not going to get into that race. And I'm just going to try and work at the pace that I can work at and make work that I am happy to put into the world. And if that is a run of 25 cups that tell the story that I want to tell, that's what I'm going to make.
Well, let's get a little bit pragmatic then into that, because you joked about, okay, well, I don't know about my success rate in terms of sales and whatnot.
Yeah.
What does that side of it look like? This is a big, giant question, so we can go in any direction. But in terms of, whether you're doing this, I actually don't. This has been the other fascinating thing. I've followed you for a very long time, and I have no idea if you're full-time or part-time potter.
Oh, I am part-time. I am not a full-time potter. And that is one of the major things that gets in my way, is time. Not having enough time to really dedicate to make that body of work that I would like to be able to put out into the world and get into people's hands. Is that the time is just the biggest barrier. That and a functioning kiln. So one piece that I've been working on, that I will be working on for the next 8 years, I have this piece called General Order, which is a distributed sculpture series. So it's going to be a modular distributed sculpture around Juneteenth. And the first year were these celebration cups, and I made 22 because it was 2022. So a little trite, but it's my sculpture. That's what I'm doing. This year I made 23 sharing bowls. Next year I will make 24 of something. And so that work, being able to do that work and sell it, though I sold out of both of them. I sold out of the first year and I sold out of everything that I offered for the second year. I held 3 back. I'm going to be at the American Pottery Festival in Minneapolis next week at the Northern Clay Center, and I kept 3 of those bowls to sell at that. So we'll see. We'll see if I sell out. So selling out of that looks like that. And that's very successful, but it's a very small amount of work for maintaining visibility and space in the market side of what you're doing. The hard part for me is finding that time to make enough other work that I can then participate in sales or do other sales. That's the challenge. But yeah, I want to be in a place where I'm making these pieces and putting them out and they all sell.
Which also might, just to be realistic, might also be why Rich forced himself to make that quickly, because he took that leap to go full time and was like, all right, to make these numbers work, I gotta make these mini mugs. I gotta make these mini pieces and sell this much, right?
Yep, for sure. Absolutely.
This is always the catch-22 for everybody, is like all of us, I think anybody listening, I'm just going to make the assumption, all of us want to be full-time, right? Like that's, you've touched clay and you're like, how can I do it?
I would love to be full-time.
Right. But then there is that catch-22 of kind of like what that reality looks like is like there would be so much more pressure to produce or to have enough or to sell enough where, you know, if you can mentally hold on and kind of overcome that, there is a lot of freedom in being able to explore creatively without that pressure.
Yep. That's for sure. That is for sure.
How in the world did you come up with the idea of an 8-year-long project?
It's a 10-year project.
10. God.
So I think it also stemmed from what you were talking about of wanting to make an art piece. I want to make, you know, a piece that might be in a gallery or a museum and not maybe necessarily in someone's home. And I wanted to, so a couple of factors came in. I was excited about Juneteenth and celebrating that. I was excited about celebrating our first Black female Supreme Court justice. So I was excited about celebrating that. And I wanted to do something that would be this work of art that I wanted something that would have geographic distribution, that would be available in a lot of different places. And I wanted to bring in this conceptual side of it, that the sculpture, general order, is both the individual single celebration cup in one person's home. It's also all of the celebration cups. It's also all of the sharing bowls. It's also all of everything I make next year and for the next 8 years coming. So that there's this kind of distributed diaspora of pieces of art that are conceptually connected to each other and to this concept of what we're celebrating, of celebrating Juneteenth. So those are the things that I wanted to make. And I'm interested in, like, when it's done, and I will have one of each one of the things. So I'll have that collection of general order. And there will also be people who have individual items of general order all over the place, which I think is something I think it's cool. I think it's going to be cool to have, you know, somebody in Massachusetts, somebody in Alaska, maybe one day someone international will buy one. So far, it's only been Americans. It is for Juneteenth, so maybe that makes sense. But that's what got me excited about it. And I think the other thing that I was thinking about with that, I was trying to think about a different way of doing art with a capital A in a way that isn't necessarily a single thing in a single place. And thinking about that with literature as an art form, that concept, once somebody writes that poem, writes that book, that can exist anywhere there is a copy of that book. That is the complete work of art there that exists. And I like that idea of separating the conceptual from the manifestation, from the instance, of separating each one of those things. And that's a library science thing for all my librarians who are listening. They'll all get that. It's fervor coming to life in pottery.
You just looped everything back around to that statement you made earlier of how important your life experiences were to get you to this aesthetic. Like,
yeah,
my brain wasn't even there. And then you said that one sentence and I was like, oh my gosh, that's everything altogether.
Yeah.
I'm laughing over on this side because I normally do not dive down the rabbit hole of like conceptual conversations. I don't get that much interest, but there's just something about the way that you're doing it that I'm totally enamored. So I'm like, okay, do I need to get us back on the normal business train here?
So talking about the business is interesting. And then my work itself is, you know, I like talking about work. I like talking about pots.
Well, even the fact that you've like gone this far. I mean, I'm just thinking about the reality of working in this part-time and having the time to have thought through all of this and conceptualized in a way amidst balancing what I imagine is a bunch of other stuff when you're part-time, right? Everybody knows like you're being pulled in so many directions. And usually when we're pulled in so many directions, we don't have the brain space to then dive deep on a creative thought. So I'm like, okay, wow, how does your brain work that this works?
It does work. It does work. I do lean toward that, I think. And the sacrifice I think you make, one trade-off I make is if I'm focused on something, I do find it hard to carve out time to just do, practice your scales, to go in and make 25 mugs, to go in and make a bunch of plates, to go in and make something and get something done. That can be a challenge for me. That can definitely be a challenge for me. There's barriers to, when am I going to get time to finish this? Or what am I looking at here? And so that can be really hard. That's the hard part. But yeah, so the business side of it that's what I'm least good at. Every quarter, I never remember. I need to put a reminder, and I never remember to do the taxes on time. Every single time Washington State they call me on the phone, and this horrible voice says, please call the Department of Revenue. And I'm like, oh, again. So yeah, that's the side I'm not great at, but is really important.
Yep. Even when you put the reminder in your calendar, I'm just going to admit full stop because I hate it. It's the thing that it stresses me out so much because I'm always so worried that I'm going to mess something up, that I'm going to get audited, that it's going to, like anything you put like the eagle seal of US of A. And I'm like, wait, what's my birthday again? Did I do that correctly? How do I spell my name? Like
the lucky part for me is I don't make that much money. So the tax burden is very, very low. So it's not that burdensome. They're not gonna come after me and put me in jail and take my house. So yeah.
I do really think that this goes down a whole different rabbit hole, but it's kind of like, can we just like look at these numbers here and be like, are you really that worried about mine?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's not that much. Don't worry. You don't have to call me.
In the grand scheme of things, guys, like,
relax about that.
Like it's probably costing you more to send me that mail than
certainly some quarters. Yes, it is costing them more to come after me for that than the no business reported that they're getting back from me that quarter.
You might just be able to file zeros every quarter and then even up at the end of the year. Honestly, like that's not the worst strategy. This is where I put the asterisk that like I am not an accountant. This is not official advice.
And I have not done that either, everyone who's listening. I've not done that.
But it's possible.
Yeah.
It is possible. Oh my goodness. Okay. We're going to go to a dark place if we go talk about taxes. Well, just to make sure, just so I don't miss any of the questions that were submitted ahead of time, we've talked about this a little bit, but I just want to ask it explicitly since Shanine asked, what inspires your aesthetics? And if it's from everyday life or it's from something else, kind of how did you get to this or what? I'm not sure if she's asking what continues to inspire you or what did and got you here, however you want to take it.
Well, I think that I am really inspired by the materiality of clay as well. I think that's probably the overarching thing that is why I leave the exterior surfaces unglazed. It's because I really find that clay itself very beautiful and something that I want to celebrate. And that materiality, not taking away from that, not detracting from that is something that's really important to me. So making sure that you're using that clay. And I'm weak. I have a lot of different clay bodies that I use because I like them all and I like what's different about them. And so I like to celebrate that. I like probably the most common thing that I use decoratively is a line. I think a line is a really beautiful thing. And it just has the power to both be this decorative focal point that can be really arresting and really compelling with some elegance to it and some peace around it. The isolation of a line when there's nothing else there is, I find, very peaceful and inspiring and calming in a way. And that line can be a raised line, so it's something you can feel, or it can be a flat line. It's something that you can just see or tattooed on. And so I find those things are, I think, really inspiring. So the clay, I love a line. I also feel like a lot of what I'm inspired by are pots from ancient traditions in lots of different places all over the world. I think that when you look at some of the ancient pottery that you can see in museums or online, the sophistication of the design work that's happening there is unreal. I mean, I just feel like I'm going to be chasing that forever. They're so far ahead of what I'm doing now and what I'm trying to do that I find that very compelling and very exciting to look at and take inspiration from and try and make. And what I love about a lot of that is one of the things that I personally feel like, nobody's making anything new. If you think you're making something new, it's probably because you haven't seen that somebody else was making it 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 500 years ago.
Or you forgot whose you saw when you were scrolling.
You forgot when you saw it or whatever. We're not making anything. Nobody's doing, very few people, I should say, are doing anything brand new. And I don't find that intimidating. I find that comforting. I like the idea that we're working in this tradition where, yes, somebody has done that before. And how are you going to do that? And how are you going to change that or do that for yourself? We don't really, you don't have to, an opera singer doesn't have to write a brand new opera and sing in a totally different way in order to be a brilliant opera singer. They're singing this thing that someone else has sung before them, that many people have sung before them, and that somebody else entirely wrote. And that's okay. That doesn't take away from their brilliance. The lack of complete originality does not take away from the brilliance of the execution or the performance. And so I find it comforting that we're working in this tradition rather than trying to be always original, always one of a kind. I'm not. Plenty of people are making work that looks a lot like mine. I'm okay with that.
And there's always something a little bit different, I think, at least when done well, right? Because there is maybe a slippery slope, and this is a conversation I'm wholly unqualified for, but just feel the need to say out loud. There's, of course, a slippery slope between infringement, copyright, cultural appropriation, any of those things, any combination of those things, of making sure, but even just acknowledging out loud when you are interested in a style to say, hey, this comes from this tradition. This comes from this place.
Yeah.
I'm working on getting there in my own. I don't know that solves all of the various issues out there, but
it's very hard. And I think the copyright thing, I'm conflicted on that too, because I'm going to get mad at somebody for putting a line on something. I'm not, everyone's doing that. Everyone's done that. There's nothing new about that. And so of course someone can do that. And I would find it hilarious if someone got mad at me for putting a line on something, and I would say, are you kidding me? Who hasn't done this? It's not original, but it's something I did. Yeah, it is a very slippery slope, and there's a lot of nuance in there that does merit conversation. It's not something that I stay up at night thinking about too much.
Yeah. What you said about the connection to the tradition and history makes me think about the interview I listened to with Osa and Ben Carter on Tales of the Red Clay Rambler, because she was the first person, and I was like screaming yes in the car, because she's the first person I ever heard to say out loud that she wasn't interested in creating something uniquely different and her and separate. She's interested in carrying this tradition and combining the styles of the different people she's learned from. And it's ironic to me because I think hers are very unique and they do stand out as she's combining all of these different resources.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to just hear from someone who I admire that, that's not the goal. That's not the end game. And I'm like, finally.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that's not the motivation. And yeah, I can appreciate that. And also see that her work it's definitely looks, but that could be ignorance on our part. That could very much be also that we just have not seen enough yet to know where that fits in.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very good point. For me, it's just freeing from, I think, a lot of the formal conversation around art, and going back to that capital A, especially in American university culture, is so the individual, right? Very, I would almost say kind of the Andy Warhol-esque personality. You have to be an entity. You're your own thing. All the kind of artists that came out of the GI Bill situation.
Well, I didn't go to art school, so I'm super curious about your experience. I didn't study art.
Well, and I mean, I only dipped my toes in because I was so much on the commercial side of being a graphic designer, right? And I think this is part of why when I started this podcast, I wanted to focus on the business side, because the conceptual stuff, I just kind of rolled my eyes at it because all the conversations were very individual, to where I was like, whatever. I want to work with my hands. I want to make what I like. Maybe that's particular also to pottery in terms of like, it is so much about the medium. Like it is about the making practice. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a well formulated thing, but it was just that conversation that Osa was having that I was listening to that was just such a relief of like, this is what I was looking for when I was getting so annoyed by those conversations in school. This was the thing that was never acknowledged, right? You had art history, but that was kind of over here in your library sciences crowd, right? And then you had the people doing the making, and there was no connection of how these two things work together. So
yeah, that'll be an interesting conversation. And I will go look up that interview. I haven't heard that yet.
I will put a link. I'm writing down all the links rather down here so I don't forget, because I feel like sometimes I say, I'll put that link in the show notes, and then I don't remember that I've said that.
She did not, reader. She did not put them in the show notes.
There's, spoiler alert, guys, while I do have help to do this, there's definitely not like a whole team of people behind me doing all of the things that all the other shows, whatever. Anyway, well, we talked a little bit just to kind of give everybody an idea of what life actually looks for you. I know we've also very quickly gotten to an hour, so I don't want to overuse your time, but we've talked about you being part-time. So what does that balance of life look like? What's all happening in Tacoma?
So I have a job that I work 4 days a week, and then I have 3 free full days that I can work on pots on the weekends, which means that you don't get a lot of days off, that can definitely lead to burnout when you have 4 days of one job and 3 days of another job. Because, we all know it's wonderful and it's fun, but it's a job, it's work. So I have 4 days where I'm doing that. And then in the evenings, I can also, what's great about having a basement studios, I can run down and check on my pots. I can run down and do something quickly during one of those first 4 days of the week that I wouldn't be able to do if I was 30 minutes away, 40 minutes away. I think I'd be too tired at the end of the day to try and do that. So having that basement studio is a real advantage. And then I get to make work on the weekends. I have a kiln here in the basement so I can fire at home as well. I just try and, make things. I do try and think about the cycles of, like, one place that I sell, me and 2 other potters who I don't think you've had on your show yet, but you absolutely should. Sarah Downing of Downing Pottery or Sarah Woodson, I think, Downing Pottery, and Nicole Pepper of Mod Home Ceramics. We 3 do these sales a couple of times a year. We do them at my house, and a couple of times they've been in the backyard, and we've had one inside. And we do them in like the spring and then a holiday sale. So I have these cycles of, okay, I'm going to have to make some work for that sale and make enough for that sale. I'm going to have to make enough for this sale. So I'll try and put together a making list of my too many types of clay, of what I want to make and the different types of clay, and make things for those sales, or I end up making things for these milestones rather than trying to do kind of just a regular, more even paced thing. I end up trying to make, okay, I'm going to have this sale. I know this is going to be twice a year. And okay, I'm going to be in this whatever festival, and I need to have some work for that, or I'm going to need to have some work for this. So that's how I approach that. It's not ideal. It does mean that I always feel like I don't have enough work. I always feel like I didn't get enough time to make what I want to make. Sometimes that is more true than others. Always a little bit true that I didn't have time to make what I want to make, but sometimes that matters and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. That's how I work.
So you're living the life of a full-time potter already.
Well,
because that sounds very similar to what's going on.
Yeah, that part definitely is a thing. Yeah.
This is like, I got to figure out what it is about pottery that brings this out in people, because as a type A obsessive planner, I am hyperventilating the night before markets when Francesca's like, yeah, the kiln will be done at like 1. It'll be cool enough by 6 or 7. I'll pull the pots out and put them in these remaining 2 boxes, and we'll finish loading up the trailer and we'll go to the market. And I'm like, no. Like, I get twitchy, but everybody I know does this.
Yeah. Half the time you have to then just abandon your kiln because it's too hot and you can't open it. And so, none of that stuff is going to be in the sale. Oh, well, it'll be in the next one. Or there'll be a fail. I had this idea that was so cute for Valentine's Day last year that I didn't get to do, but I'm going to do it this year. I'll bring it back. Luckily, the cards that I made that went along with it did not have the year printed on them, so I can use them for this year.
This is a business lesson right there. Never print anything with a date that's not an event that it has to have the date.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have been the end of the world to reprint all these little cards, but yes, it's nice that I have this concept and this thing ready that I just didn't get done. Did not get done in time.
Nope. This is the universal truth.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to have to get over it.
Yeah.
I'll report back. We're not there yet.
Yep. See how it ends up.
Oh my goodness. Well, I could keep going forever, but I do want to be respectful of your time.
I'm fine. Was there any other questions or any other thing that you wanted to ask me about, or anything anyone else asked about, or my work? I mean,
I might throw that back to you and say, is there something that you want to, what is there that is just open-ended question? Where do you want to go that, maybe people don't typically know that you wish they knew, or for other potters also that in conversation from the salons that you're like, oh, this just changed things, or, small ending question
I
here.
think though, well, I'll answer that in a couple of parts. I think from the salons, I think I would say that being able to hear people's career retrospectives in a small group like that is really priceless. And so I would highly encourage people, if you have a community, and honestly, one of the best ones we had was the very first one we had. There were only like 6 of us here, and it was phenomenal. So don't worry about it being too small. I think that people have a lot that they can share, and it's almost even better when it's small like that. And we've had some where there's been 65 people, and that's a lot of people to try and manage. But that has been something that's been really pivotal for me. I think the other thing that probably people can find on my website or find on my Instagram that was a real pivot point for me, one thing that really made me be an artist in public was what happened in our country in the summer of 2020 with the George Floyd murder, and then the protests and this racial awareness of a conversation that we were having in our country. For a lot of people, it was the first time they'd ever really had to think about or deal with race as a concept. And that moment for me was pivotal as an artist, because prior to that, I didn't post my picture on Instagram. I wasn't a Black American artist in public. I wasn't lying about it or hiding it, but I didn't advertise that just because, as we know, because of racism, because I didn't want my work to be devalued the way that the work of marginalized communities is always devalued. And I didn't want to deal with that. And so I just wasn't very public with it. But that became a real turning point where I wanted to join that conversation. And that's what prompted me or inspired me or compelled me to put my picture out, to be in places where I'm speaking and people can see me and see that I'm a Black woman making art. And also inspired my protest wear, my protest pieces, like my Black Lives Matter protest signs that look like cups, but the protest signs that look like necklaces, or the speaking cups. So that was a big turning point for me. And I think that being in public is probably something that a lot of people have dealt with in a lot of, it's not always about race for people. I think there's the same thing happens if you are anything different, that you feel like you want to sometimes not necessarily advertise that. And then it can become really central to your practice and really, really part of what you're saying and doing. Any questions about that, or anything you want to ask me about that?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I went down the rabbit hole of the business side of having functional and these art sets. But I think I had started and then stopped to say that with this minimalist aesthetic, you are taking on these huge subjects. And what's so impressive to me is I can look at that work and feel like that line stops me, right? It interrupts something. And I might not have known the subjects until I then read your description, but it is succeeding on a level that I'm going, why are those 3 dots there?
Yeah.
What's happening here? It's stopping me for some reason. And that for me, and why I went so much into the conceptual and the aesthetic on our conversation, is because I don't see that happen a lot. I see plenty of contemporary work that I'm kind of like, meh, okay, whatever, move along, and don't even get to the description, or I have to read the description to understand what's going on. And you have managed to get to this place of, even if I never read it, even if I didn't know what General Order was about in the grand 10-year scheme, there's something there. And then when I do read it, it's like, oh, okay. Now I understand the weight of this and the importance of this, but the aesthetic is still like so strong on its own. And I think that's something just amazing, frankly.
Thank you so much. I mean, I do really believe that this clay, the clay itself, the piece you make can hold those ideas. It really can. And it does sound a little bit goofy, or, I lived in California for years, so of course I'm going to be like that. But it will hold on to those ideas. It really can hold your ideas, and it can hold your emotions, and it can convey them to someone else. And that's what I'm trying to work with, I think, that I want to put these ideas into the pieces so that they can spark conversations beyond their initial making and outside of that.
I also just want to honor and recognize, too, that I think for so many people, with everything that's happened in the last 3 years and continues, let's not, I'm stumbling over words because I was like, past tense is not the appropriate grammatical choice here by any means, but how you can do that with art, right? Because sometimes there's the struggle and the conflict of like, well, I'm just an artist, right? I'm not a scientist curing COVID. I'm not a legal-minded person helping get someone out of jail who was arrested at a protest, or I'm not, these very tangible, direct action things. But I mean, ultimately, at least from my white, cis, heterosexual perspective, we have to change culture at the end of the day. And culture gets changed.
That is our space. Yeah, that is the space that we occupy.
It doesn't, we all know, at least hopefully most of us know, it doesn't matter what the law says, right? Like it depends on what culture dictates and will drive change forward more than whatever.
It makes you want to pay attention to those attacks on culture. Like, I think, especially when I think about what is happening in censoring of books for children right now is appalling. The idea that books that are written for children can't be read by children because somebody doesn't like what's in that book. Well, just don't read that book. Let somebody else read that book. That's not your book. Read another one. But that attack on culture, that is how that changes, or that changes, in my opinion, for the worse, when we start to restrict access to things or take things away because one person says no, even though the other people are saying, well, that's fine for me. I want that book. I think that's something where we really need to keep our eyes open and see how that manifests and see how that plays out in that culture.
Well, and also I think especially in the US right now, but I think it's happening everywhere because we read this in Italian news and different things like that with my in-laws. Having a space to have the conversations that kind of remove us from whatever news feed, whatever station you watch television on, or, I don't want to say it's a softer way to approach a subject because that's not always true, but it just, maybe it can get a topic in front of people in a different way than they would have, they wouldn't have chosen it to get themselves in front of that topic.
Well, that's exactly what I was trying to do with those protest signs that are shaped like cups. I want you to have that conversation with somebody who is never going to go to a protest, is not going to watch anything about this on TV. They're not going to read any articles about that, but maybe they're in your home and you're going to have a glass of wine or you're going to have a cup of coffee, and the design is interesting enough that they will say, oh, what are these 3 lines? What is going on with this cup? And you can have that conversation about how race has impacted your life, or how that has happened in a smaller, safer, easier place than the other place where they're never going to be. You're never going to get them to those other places. So yeah, that's one of the things I was trying to do with that is use those protest signs as a way to create an invitation to a conversation.
I'm so glad you started putting your face on the internet also. I just want to say, like, so bad.
It certainly gets easier.
It's one of those catch-22s.
Yeah, you start and it's really hard, and then it does get easier. And now with AI, you think, well, why not? They're going to have you anyway. They're going to have your voice and your face and your work anyway. You may as well.
We just took a whole turn. A whole different place.
Oh, well, those are the only things I wanted to talk about. That, make sure I talked about that. Pitch the salon every chance I get. I want people to do that. And let's see. I don't think I have any other. I'm glad you asked about my lines and the clay that you're using and all of that. That's
Heck
that's
yeah.
important to me.
I'm so excited about this idea. I hope people generally take to heart the idea of starting their own salons. My brain is now going a million miles a minute of like, how can, because I'm comfortable on the tech side of things. I'm like, okay, how can I help like set up like a database? Like if people start doing this, I don't want to say they should contact you to say they're starting doing this because that's not fair on your inbox. So I'm going to volunteer as tribute on this one.
That would be great. I mean, just if people want to do it,
I'm just envisioning this like,
they really could. And you could start super small. You could say, we're going to do this 4 times a year. It's just going to be once a quarter. And we want to bring these people together. You don't even have to commit to long term. It could be, we're going to do a 4 series salon and it's just going to be those 4 events. And then you don't have to do it again after that. But there's some real magic waiting for you if you wanted to give it a try.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. I feel like I'm like, we just hit a bunch of really big subjects to the end. And I'm like, okay, part of me wants to dive deeper. And also part of me doesn't. Like, it's completely up to how much time you have.
Oh, I have time. If you have more questions for me, I'm happy to talk if you have more questions.
Well, I just don't want to like leave it there. I mean, it's one of those things where these are subjects that don't have an end.
They don't. When I think about some of the other ideas, like I'm doing some pieces right now that I'm really interested in how we perceive gender and gender identity and the spectrum that really is. Just the bizarreness of the idea that just because we thought there were 2 things and now there's way more than that's not okay. Well, we were wrong. We didn't know. You didn't know any better. And now that you do know better, do better.
Well, and also like look at history. Yeah. There were multiple. Like this isn't new. Like, going back to what you said, none of us are making anything new.
It's not new. Yeah, it's not new. But I think so. I'm doing I have some ideas around that. I think that are really interesting, and then I'm also really interested in just aging and how we deal with that in our society, and how like some work I think that might start conversations or think about that, and how we have this culture that is absolutely obsessed with youth, like the idea of 20 under 20 and 30 under 30. And if you don't do this when you're 19 years old, well, it's too late for you and your life is over. And most of your life happens after that early stage. And thinking about how we contend with that as we grow is also really interesting. That's what I think that clay lends itself to talking about really big things, really big things. And that's what I want to use it for.
I love that. I'm glad you brought that up because nobody could see me when you were saying, hey, I started clay at 40. I was like punching my arms in the air because I do hear from people so often of the, oh, I wish I would have, or, oh, now it's this later. We have a lot of this like feeling of like, well, I can't do that now, but I guess I'll whatever, fill in the blank, when, especially from this conversation, and I've seen it come through in many others, where like, there's no way you would make the work that you're making now had you not had those life experiences. No. There's no way I could host these conversations without the experience in photography. Like they're necessary.
Yeah. No, I think that is really true. You can't do the same thing. And that goes both ways. There are things that, yes, it is too late for you to be a, I don't know, prima ballerina, or there are things that are age dependent that you cannot do when you are older, but it's not everything. And there are some things that you can't really do effectively until you have lived long enough. And I don't think we pay attention to that enough. So I think that's something really interesting. Before we go, I do have one more. So the photography thing, that is my biggest struggle and my most hated thing about doing this work. And I do really appreciate the focus you put on that. I mean, what I want is a magical little setup that stays in the same place in my house and a camera that never moves. And I just put the cup where I want it to, there's a little X and you just put it there and push the button and you're done. Yeah. I hate that aspect of making work. I don't love it at all. So hard.
You're not alone, as you know.
I know. I appreciate that you put a big focus on that because it is such a struggle.
And to be fair, this is why I'm so passionate about systematizing, because I don't have a space in the house that's always permanently set up. I'm forever having to put up backdrops and take down backdrops and get the camera in and out of the closet. But because I know what I'm going to do every time, it's not as big of the mental lift to like just do, I know I'm just going to slide whatever junk's on the dining room table out of the way so I can put the backdrop up there and it's going to work. As opposed to like, okay, well, where am I going to put the, changing where I'm going every time? No, that doesn't work.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Because the thing, I think everybody thinks that they're supposed to be, how am I trying to phrase this? You don't need to be as creative. Like, save your creative brain power for the pots. It's okay to do the same thing every time with photography. In fact, I'm encouraging it because consistency is important. But like, don't use that unless you're getting really excited about photography and this is going to be your new hobby because clay has become a job. Okay, fine, great, go for it. But I don't even do that. I don't want to use the creative energy for photography. I want to use the creative energy for
making
pots.
pots. Yeah, I just want to make pots. So yeah, that is really that's a real struggle. So for everyone who's like me, yeah, me too. That's why my photographs on Instagram, every single one looks like it's from a completely different person because it is from a completely different person every time. That's what happens. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we do have a trip to Seattle, and I know Seattle and Tacoma are not the same thing.
No,
but we do have a trip to Seattle booked in October.
When in October?
We'll have to figure this out.
Oh, that would be awesome. It would be really awesome. So we're having one on the 21st. It's going to be Rick Mahaffey. It's going to be phenomenal. He's an amazing potter and has an incredible body of work that's going to be just stellar. And so it's going to be Saturday on the 21st. You are absolutely welcome.
Awesome.
We would love to have you at the salon.
Awesome. Well, I'll have to double check our flights and send you a message because I feel like we should have done a much longer trip. I'm already thinking, I'm like, oh man, if I start bringing pottery into this, because we're visiting my dearest friend that moved out there a couple of years ago, and we haven't been out there since they moved. And so I wasn't going to tell anybody that we were going. And now I'm like, oh no, we need time for pots.
Are they potters too?
No, no. I know. If they were, then it wouldn't be a big deal. Then it would be like, no problem.
Yeah. Well, man, that would be great if you wanted to come and then you could see what it's all about and see what we're doing and have the experience. It's going to be it's going to be a good one too.
I can put the duct tape X's in your house for the pots and the camera and the...
Yeah, and I'll buy a tripod and buy some, like an iPad or something to put there, and that will just stay there forever and I'll never move it. That would be ideal.
Oh my gosh, I love it. All right, well, we'll have to sync. We'll check it out. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, you are more than welcome. And people who are listening, if you're in the Tacoma area, go to the website, sign up for the mailing list, get your invites, and come to our salon. We are very welcoming. We would love to have you.
And I will remember absolutely to put the link in the show notes.
Sounds good.
But I also want to send them to where you are on the internet. So whether it be website, Instagram, I don't know, where the best place.
No, Instagram, I don't post regularly, but Instagram is good. And it's Juniper Clay is my studio name. And that's also my website is juniper-clay. And I'll send you the link and you can keep up to date with me on my website, on Instagram. It's very sporadic, not very regular, but I try and get stuff out there.
But that's okay. You're doing this part-time. You don't have to post like an influencer.
I cannot believe the volume some people are capable of doing. I'm just in awe of that. And I think, oh, and you're making pots and you're making these reels with music and it's like a little movie. Oh, I cannot believe people have that kind of talent and time.
I am here to be the realist also, because I can't tell you how many people I talk to that are part-time that are like, okay, well, so how do I make reels? How do I do this? And I'm like, why are you worried about this right now? If your goal is to quit your job in 6 months, okay, let's get serious. We can put together a strategy. But if you're good, if you like your job, if this is a good, this needs to remain a hobby for your mental well-being, then it doesn't matter.
Stay with it. Yeah. It does feel like just this churn and you have to do it, but you don't. And I don't. My video reels are always just me talking. Stand there. I'm just talking about pots. That's what I do. There's no music. There's no cuts.
So are mine.
It's just me talking.
it was a lot easier to get comfortable staring at my own face on the camera than splicing together a reel and trying to like stitch something together with Diana's Beyonce moves. Like, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to do that.
She's amazing with those. I think she's doing a talk at ClayCon West called Reels That Resonate. And she's going to talk all about her process and everything that she does going into making reels. She is a genius at doing that stuff. And so if you're going to ClayCon West, definitely go check that out and just go watch Diana's reels because they're amazing.
Oh my gosh. Just look at her like alter persona.
Have you had her on?
Yeah. She was one of the first like 15 people, less than that, first 10. Early day episodes.
You should bring her back. Her career has evolved in just spectacular ways.
So what's fascinating is at the time we interviewed, she still had her interior design gig. But in between when we recorded and when I aired the episode is when she quit. And so I've actually been I've been talking to a few people about in the new year, I want to start a segment that just drips out. And if anybody has opinions on this is open season to my inbox. Send me your ideas, podcast@makers-playbook.com. I want to do do you remember on VH1, the Where Are They Now show?
Yeah, do a little catch up.
Yep. Exactly. I don't know what the right amount of time is. You know, you don't want to do it too soon after an interview because that's awkward. We want to get new voices on here. But I feel like maybe a 3-year gap is a nice thing to get a perspective on, like, how much has a business actually changed? What worked? What didn't? How are you actually spending your time? You know? How long do those reels take you, Diana?
Well, I think she's going to talk about all of that in her talk at ClayCon West. But yeah, that would be very cool. I think that's a really good idea to do a catch-up session where you can see what's changed, what's different, what they decided not to do anymore, you know, like what's not working and what they want to do more of. It'd be very cool.
Awesome. Friends, I love the salon Kristina and the Tacoma Potters are creating. And I really do hope you consider getting your own group together in your local area. There is so much for us all to learn from one another, and allowing an algorithm to determine whose stories get heard is definitely not the best. I mean, don't get me wrong, the internet is an amazing way for us to connect with each other across vast geographic differences. And that's super important too, because I also love and adore the community, which is our Makers Playbook virtual membership space, and the fact that we have makers from all over the world joining together on our little slice of the internet to cheer each other on and help each other problem solve when times are less than amazing. Which, P.S., if you didn't know, you can learn more about the community at makersplaybook.com/community. But that being said, there is also value in sitting down in person, sharing some snacks or a drink, and hearing the stories of someone who maybe doesn't have a big internet presence to shout to the algorithm to let everybody know about. The point is, whatever way you can, whether it's virtually or in person, I hope that you find some clay people, because it is something truly special. And if the type of group you're looking for doesn't yet exist, maybe you should create it. You are always welcome to reach out to me to talk about getting something started. As Kristina said, it does not have to be complex, and sometimes what can be perceived as maybe a tiny group can also be the most powerful. All right, I'm going to stop myself there because otherwise, if I keep going, I'm going to get super existential about humanity and the importance of being in relationship with each other, and I'm already starting again. So, if you are looking for a bit of virtual support, if you don't know other makers in your area or in general, or if Instagram is feeling like an overwhelming place on the internet that used to be a place to connect with each other, but now might just be a total time suck and sometimes not really a great mental health space, well, I would be honored and love it if you come check out the community. You can learn more at makersplaybook.com/community. Once again, this episode is made possible in part thanks to our sponsor, Amico.
Hi, I'm Cammie, the purchasing manager at Amico, providing you with everything you need for clay. This episode is brought to you by Amico Brent. Find your favorite Amico glaze or Brent equipment at your local distributor. Happy glazing!
Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Kristi Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.